Mandatory Minimum Sentences by Jonathan Olderr. For a free democratic nation, the United States of America has developed a reputation for its justice system. Being a citizen of the United States grants a person the rights provided in the Constitution, such as one is innocent until proven guilty, one has the right to legal representation, and to the Miranda rights. The United States is also known for incarcerating criminals and having a multitude of prisons. This is a negative consequence of mandatory minimum sentencing laws, which require people who violated specific federal and/or state laws to serve the same amount of time. Judges are given no discerning power in these situations. Most of these laws apply to drug offenses, but they have been applied to other crimes, such as gun violations, pornography, and economic offenses. There are 195 different penalties that result in mandatory minimum sentences, which is an increase of 97 penalties in the past 2 decades. The reasons for this is that back in the 1970s, the crime rate in the United States was rising, and the government needed a quick way to get criminals off the streets, so they developed these laws. It started working, so the government added more penalties that incurred minimum sentences. Although mandatory minimum sentences made it easier and quicker to put criminals into jail, while seemingly lowering crime rates, this law resulted in overpopulation of prisons, increased the financial burden on taxpayers, and excessively punishing people who made poor choices. The original intentions behind the mandatory minimum sentencing laws were good. It aligned with the culture of accountability in America, that the sentiment that if you do the crime, you pay the time. The law puts criminals in the jail faster without having a trial, and just sending criminals to jail for a certain number of years seemed to be easier and more efficient to lawmakers. With about 67% of federal drug offenders receiving mandatory minimum sentences, this strategy appeared to lower crime rates in America. Knowing that this was happening, citizens started to feel safer since crime was decreasing in their country. The support for these laws increased, so more and more mandatory minimum sentences were added. However, these laws were greatly increasing the populations of prisons, which became a huge cost on the taxpayers. The prison system of the United States became overburdened with 2.2 million people incarcerated. Of these criminals, 217,800 are in federal prisons, 352,500 are in state prisons, and 735,900 are in local jails. Shockingly, that is 25% of the world's total prison population. This translates to more people incarcerated than any other country, including Communist China and Russia. The total number of prisoners is a result of an 800% increase within the last 3 decades due to the mandatory minimum sentencing laws. Many unwanted consequences arise when prisons are overpopulated. With large populated prisons, it is difficult for wardens and guards to maintain control over the prisoners. When talking about the guard-to-prisoner ratio, the president of the Council of Prison Locals and former correctional officer Dale Desholt states, "There is no way that they, the guards, can monitor that many prisoners." There is also the problem of fighting occurring in overcrowded prisons. According to the GAO's Director of Homeland Security and Justice, David Maurer, if you start cramming more and more people into a confined space, you're going to create more tensions and problems. Having overpopulated prisons is clearly a problem, and it is a direct result of mandatory minimum sentencing laws. A multitude of prisoners confined to prisons is also an expensive burden on taxpayers. The amount of money that is spent on prisoners annually is about $80 billion. That is more money spent on incarceration than any other country. This is because the United States houses too many prisoners to deal with and pay for. The average cost of housing a prisoner differs between states. but the range is about $31,307 to $60,000 annually, whereas the cost of welfare per person is $38,004 per year. It is bewildering why more is spent on prisoners who have done wrong by society than we do our needing, law-abiding citizens. If we were to decrease the amount spent on prisoners, we could put it to use elsewhere. For example, the money could be used for education and career placement. Investing money in this will help citizens get a steady job and not participate in illegal activities. Money could also be used for family counseling or addiction treatment centers for people who were sent to jail because of an addiction such as alcohol or drugs, so that they won't go back to jail. These expensive burdens are a direct result of prison overpopulation, which happens because of mandatory minimum sentencing laws. Often, the punishments for mandatory minimums are excessive. For example, a man could sell a bag of methamphetamine and get sentenced to life in prison. These laws expose people to who made a mistake to the hardcore criminal population in jail. It is a negative environment for average citizens. Not only this, but being sent to jail for long periods of time will also break up families. It has even been proven that long-term sentences are not a good deterrent to crime, that they do not teach people a lesson. There is also the race component. There was a disparity in the harshness of sentencing for those who in possession of crack versus powdered cocaine. The ratio was 100 to 1. This was because it was found that more African American people use crack cocaine over powdered. So they increased the punishment on crack cocaine to put African Americans in jail longer. In 2010, the Fair Sentencing Act passed, and it changed the disparity to 18 to 1. This is a huge improvement, however, it is still a major problem. Being in prison also does not offer people a second chance. Many people suffer in jail because they could lose the chance for their dream job, and they could be broken apart from their family. These harsh consequences are the result of having mandatory minimum sentences in place. Now, given the evidence provided, mandatory minimum sentencing laws need to be changed, if not abolished. There are prison reform groups lobbying for a change, such as Families Against mandatory minimums. Some lawmakers are even starting to speak out against mandatory minimum sentences, as Senator Patrick Leahy says, "Our reliance on a one-size-fits-all approach to sentencing has been a great mistake. Mandatory minimums are costly, unfair, and do not make our country safer." With the people turning against them, mandatory minimums need to be changed or just abandoned, even though they facilitate the process of putting criminals into jail and give the impression of lowering crime rates. These laws result in overcrowded prison, an increase of the financial burden on taxpayers, and giving unnecessary excessive punishment to people who made poor choices. American citizens who are concerned about the criminal justice system should write to their representatives in Congress to petition for change. Thank you.